This week on the Communicators, a discussion on issues affecting television and radio stations in the United States. Our guest is David Rehr, head of the National Association of Broadcasters.
David Rehr, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be here. It's always great to be on C-SPAN.
We're going to talk about a lot of things today, but recent news as of late deals with a letter that your organization sent to Nielsen. What was its intent?
Nielsen, for the past 8 to 10 months, have been putting out results on the preparedness of America for the digital television transition. And they argue that there are 5.9 million people who are unprepared. And I sent a letter to the head of Nielsen just saying, shouldn't call it totally unprepared. 97% of America are aware of the DTV transition. We just had our kind of first switchover on February 17th that went, I think, very well for viewers. And I just think that they need to be a little bit more empirically clear on who's prepared, who's not prepared. You know, we want every viewer to be able to get great over-the-air digital television, and I think it'd be helpful in our efforts as we're coming to the close on June 12th.
When you say empirically clear, where is the unclarity at? As far as, is it the way they compile the numbers?
No, it's the way they define total unpreparedness. They say that there's a significant number of Americans who are completely unprepared. These are people who have converter boxes, but they just haven't attached them to their television yet because some of their stations are still in analog. So I just think they should have a category that's totally unprepared, people who have converter boxes that have not connected them, because then that allows broadcasters. We're running this massive $1.2 billion marketing campaign. It allows us to target those messages even better to the folks that haven't taken the right action yet. And that was the point of the letter.
Fawn Johnson of Dow Jones Newswires also joins us for the questioning.
I was just curious, how do you know that these people who have converter boxes and haven't hooked them up?
Yeah, well, we've done, the point I made about, since the Congress mandated that television broadcasters would go fully digital, originally on February 17th, and now Congress extended that to June 12th, we have been running a massive campaign on behalf of our viewers. And we've spent countless dollars, and all of our research tells us that 40% of the totally unprepared, according to Nielsen, viewers have converter boxes already. So all we're saying to Nielsen is be more specific. Have a couple categories, because what happens is when you put out headlines that say, these people are totally unprepared, it spooks people, and it doesn't give a true representation of where we are in the campaign, and I think does a disservice to everyone's efforts, including Nielsen's.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the digital conversion just generally, because the transition date was moved from February 17th to June 12th just recently. It's caused some confusion, especially given the massive advertising that the broadcasters have put in. Can you talk a little bit about how the delay has impacted your activities in trying to educate viewers, and whether you're getting to a place where you might be irritating them, which I think you've referenced in testimony.
Yeah, a couple kind of data points. First, 643 television stations have gone fully digital. Secondly, I think the emphasis for moving the date from February 17th to June 12th had to do with the lack of coupons getting out to Americans. There's a program where you can apply for a coupon to help offset the cost of the converter box. NTIA, which is a Commerce Department agency, was in charge of it. Because of all these accounting rules in the government, I think it's something called the Anti-Deficiency Act, 2 million people were placed on a waiting list. Well, the transition was coming. They couldn't get the coupons. It couldn't help them purchase the converter boxes, and I think the Obama administration and the Congress rightly felt that we should be sure that these people get the coupons and can buy the converter boxes.
Well, and I guess I was just curious how that's affected broadcasters' activities. I mean, I know it's been, for some they switched early because they had to.
Right.
How do you educate viewers, and how do you change the message?
Well, the good news about our broadcasters and the folks at the National Association of Broadcasters, we have a digital television transition team, is that when Congress started talking about this, we anticipated the date change. So literally the day the House passed the bill, before it was signed by President Obama, we had new ads out, we had new spots, we had changed all our websites. We had done everything to begin what we refer to as the rebranding of the date. And several of our spots encouraged people to help their friends and neighbors. None of that was date specific. We had to change collateral material. I think we did it as seamless as possible. You know, the bad news was 97% of America knew about the DTV transition. Most of them knew the February 17th date. The good news is I think we were able to transition quickly in those markets where it's now been moved to June 12th. And we're going to do the best we can to make sure that they're aware of the message and that they make this transition successful.
And how do you stop from annoying them?
Well, you know, we do hear from a lot of viewers that, you know, you're telling me about this, I've heard about it, I've seen the crawls, the snipes, the spots. You know, you learn in this business that you can never really please everybody. And I think at the end of the day, it's our goal and the FCC goal to make sure that we over-communicate. Because what we don't want on June 13th is for somebody to wake up and not have a television signal. God forbid there's an emergency somewhere and or there's a breaking news item and they want to know about it and their TV's not working. So, you know, every step we go through in the DTV transition, you know, I kind of look up and say to myself, well, there's another lesson we learn if we ever do this again, but we probably won't be doing this again in our lifetime.
You said 97% knew, but you call that bad news.
Well, it's just bad in terms of now we need to kind of reapproach them with the rebranding of the date. Mm-hmm. We faced this. The first shutoff was in Wilmington, North Carolina. We initially polled in Wilmington after they announced they were going to shut off last year. I think it was on September 7th, and we found out that 40 to 50% of the people knew the DTV transition and thought the date was in February. So part of the campaign is how do you re-educate people with a different date? And our team's done a great job, and we're going to do some more polling. And the television stations all across America have been very engaged in this.
But it cost them. It's still costing
Yes.
for those who may have made the transition. What kind of cost are they incurring?
Well, it costs them with monthly electric bills. Most people are not aware that your average television station in America that has not fully transitioned to digital is running a television station in analog and a television station in digital. So part of our campaign is to get the message out that if you have a market where your stations are not going to go to June 12th, you can still reap the great benefits of digital television today. Put your converter box in, take action.
But there's a problem with that, isn't it? And at least in some cases, the analog signals and the digital signals aren't quite the same, which means that some viewers could actually lose channels once they convert to digital. How big a problem is that, and how do you address it?
Well, the FCC has asked us to really focus in on those markets where 2% or more of the audience could lose their signal. We're not quite sure in the mapping where this will all occur. Stations are already communicating to their viewers on the peripheral parts of their territories, their coverage areas, where this could be and what action. I think in Washington, D.C., we've had several of our stations doing phone banks to people. But they're trying to do the best job they can communicating a potential loss of service without causing greater confusion for people who are in the core market area. I mean, the last thing we want to do in Washington, D.C. is for 98% of the people say, you could lose your television signal, freak them all out, have all sorts of confusion and disarray. We need to apply a very targeted message to those people who are kind of on the borders.
David Rehr is the president of the National Association of Broadcasters. We've been talking about television, but in the last couple of weeks, celebrities have come to D.C. to talk about radio.
Right.
What's the issue?
We call it the performance tax. And this is an effort that is spearheaded by the record labels. 3 of the 4 are foreign-owned and in foreign lands, to impose a fee tax on radio stations for playing music. And we very aggressively and vigorously oppose it. The labels have used the artists to be kind of the front, but many people are unaware that at least 50% of every dollar that they would receive from this tax on every local radio station in America for playing music would go to labels. So, you know, we're in the Judiciary Committee held a hearing last week. We believe this is going to be a hard-fought battle. There's about 16,000 radio stations in America. We're in every congressional district, every state. They do amazing things for their local communities. We've had a great symbiotic relationship between the artists and radio stations. I always note that Congress has looked at this before and has said, you know, radio provides great promotional value, and we should keep the system as it is.
On that front, a couple of weeks ago on this program, we had Neil Portnow of the Grammys.
I saw
on the
that program.
and talked about this issue. When he specifically talked about why radio should pay the performance royalties, here's what he had to say. I want you to listen to it and respond.
There's the fact that the radio industry is between a $15 and a $20 billion industry. People listen to radio to hear music. Nobody listens to hear the advertising or to hear the other banter. It's really music that has built the business, and it should be paid for. The songwriters receive payment. When radio airs sports broadcasting, can you imagine any sports franchise that would be willing to give broadcast rights for free because it promotes the sport? Can you imagine a individual that wrote a book that is turned into a screenplay that becomes a movie that would give the rights to that book for free because the argument would be, well, we're going to promote your book because it's turned into a movie, and so you should give us those rights for free. There's no example of that anywhere, and in terms of copyright law, only these recordings are the only ones that are not paid for.
David Rehr.
Well, there's a couple things that Neil forgot to say in that program, one of which is when you asked him the question about who gets the fee or tax, he neglected to say that at least 50% of it would go to the labels, which is a big issue. Number two, we at the National Association of Broadcasters actually looked at this, what is the promotional value of radio? And we had an econometric study done by someone affiliated with the Rand Corporation who, and this was groundbreaking, who said that each year radio stations provide between $1.5 and $2.4 billion worth of promotional value for artists. So we have promotional value, and that doesn't include ticket sales. It doesn't include the weekend, hey, Toby Keith's coming into town and he's having a concert. If you call this number, all the additional things we do to drive revenue to great singers around the country. So it's a little disingenuous to say that we're not compensating artists. We do provide songwriters, many of whom are also singers, $500 million a year. And I don't think the complete story is being told. The record labels and some artists come to Capitol Hill and say, well, radio should pay for playing music. But I think Congress should really focus in on that relationship between the record label and the artist. I remember just quickly the Greg Allman lawsuit against his record label, where he was quoted in the lawsuit as saying, we only get 7 cents out of every dollar. And I think there are lots of things that Congress need to look at in that artists, you talk about all these great Motown singers that were just never really saw any of their income because the record labels took it all.
But to be fair, that's the battle between the record industry and the artists, which is not a part of the negotiation that you're involved in.
But it's all part and parcel of the same thing. For 80 years, the record labels loved promotion of music. In Utah, in Salt Lake City, several weeks ago, or over the last couple months, there were 3,800 calls made by record labels saying, play this music, play this music. Artist after artist, just several days ago, Bono talked about how American radio stations made him. What we're really focusing on here is that the record labels are emerging into the digital era, haven't changed their business model, are not doing well financially, and are casting a lot saying, where can we get revenue? Oh, let's get it from radio stations.
But focusing on the broadcasters just for the moment, you do pay publishing royalties and songwriting royalties. What's wrong with including a performer in that? Who might not be the credited songwriter on a particular.
Well, I think at least on 2 occasions, Congress has found that the promotional value of radio for those artists has has been terrific and it should continue, and that there's no need for a performance tax. What are the consequences on radio stations if this tax is imposed? There will be less diversity. We are in a difficult time right now in the broadcasting business. There's less advertising. We're all facing this difficult economic situation. We hope we come out of it very soon. But you're going to have small stations, you're going to have inner city stations, you're going to have Hispanic, African American stations not being able to pay this. They're going to fire people, they're going to go off the air. What kind of diversity of music are we going to have? If the performance tax is enacted, radio stations' economic incentive will be to play only known artists. 61% of America finds out about new music over the radio. So who does it hurt? It hurts the emerging artist. It doesn't hurt somebody who's the mega million star. And our point is we need to have a constructive and expansive hearings, dialogue. We need to grab more empirical data on this. We're willing to stand by the promotional value of radio. In the hearing last week, some of our opponents tried to undermine our study because they don't want to recognize the $1.4 to $2.4 billion.
Any room for negotiation in this argument of yours?
I think we've historically negotiated, and we provide the promotional value. You want to recognize that. Part of the problem with the complexity of this compulsory copyright law is that even if we were to say to an artist, here's the deal, we'll negotiate with you, but you have the right to say play. That's not the way it works with compulsory copyright. It goes to a compulsory copyright board made up of lawyers who hear evidence, who make a decision, and impose it industry-wide. So even if there's that emerging artist who says, my God, I want to forego this, they won't because their label will say you can't because that's a stream of income for them. But even if they were to say, you know what, I just want radio to play me, I want to become the next Madonna, they wouldn't be able to.
Well,
so
the proponents of this Performance Royalties Act have made carve-outs for some of the small stations that you've talked about, and I think that they've indicated a willingness to negotiate, and the NAB has repeatedly said no to anything. I mean, anything above zero is no. So how is that a negotiation?
Well, yeah, let's focus on the whole rights question. If it is a performance right, why do they want to make different deals with everybody? Why do they? Because it's not about a performance right. It's about what kind of deal can they drive to get Congress to enact their law. Backstopped by 50 cents out of every dollar goes to the record labels. So, let's just strip it all away, and at the end of the day, it's an attempt by an industry, the record labels, who have not changed their business model in a digital age, looking for revenue and looking to radio as a source of that revenue.
As far as terms of policy are concerned, we're just about to have a new FCC of some type, new leader, possibly even new members.
Yeah.
What does it mean for you as someone who looks out for broadcasters? What areas are on top of your list as far as this new FCC are concerned?
Well, we're looking forward to the names that are being bandied about. It's always great to get some fresh ideas, and the gentleman who's being considered for the FCC chairman is an energetic, bright, really smart person.
Julius Janikowski.
Yeah, and I think we'll do a great job, and I hope the Senate aggressively and quickly supports him and gets him over to the FCC. But issues that involve allowing radio stations that are AM stations to get FM translators. So this very local, very small town station which does so many great things in their communities can be heard on the FM dial as well. That's being considered. DTV issues relating to June 12th. The current interim chairman, Chairman Copps, has done a terrific job bringing all the parties together and having a great private-public partnership, but we still have some additional questions on what are we going to do with people who are around the edges and may lose signals? How are we going to approach them? How are we going to make sure we communicate to the listeners? We've urged the FCC to have an aggressive phone bank, so when we turn off the analog signal on June 12th, people can call somewhere and they get great technical expertise. There's something like 30 or 40 different issues. The broadcasting business, both radio and television, is a regulated business. We serve in the public interest, which I think our broadcasters do a great job doing, and we're going to have lots of issues going forward as we transition in this digital world.
Let me bring up one then. There's that area of broadcast spectrum that by a code word it's called white spaces. Some people want to make sure they're used for other purposes. Some say it provides maybe faster broadband for those wireless technologies, especially Google and the like are after that.
Right.
Is that going to be a main concern in this new FCC?
Yeah, I think it is, because the technology remains unproven. There is not a device that we could bring and put on the table right now and turn it on and decide whether it would work or not. We are still in the philosophical, theoretical range.
Didn't Motorola test a device that possibly could work?
Yeah, most of them failed. If you look at the FCC evidence, they're not 100% effective. And our argument, and the consequence for the viewers, is that unless the device is 100% effective, it will knock out people's digital television. So we have no problem with devices that don't interfere with people's ability to get great television. The problem we have is that we're in this theoretical discussion. It's unclear what the empirical evidence is. The evidence that the FCC had in its gathering, said, well, if the antenna is 12 feet high and it's looking to the left and we're holding it 7 feet away, it just might work. Well, that's not good enough with technology. So we will continue to interact with the FCC and with all those companies to say, you know what, you make something. I was quoted months ago that it's only in America that you can fail with a device and then it gets theoretically approved.
Have you talked to the acting chairman about this yet?
We've had ongoing conversations with all the commissioners about this. The NAB and MSTV, which is Maximum Service Television Association that aligns with us, just filed a lawsuit against the proceedings because they weren't done in the regular order of business. This has such great consequences on 19 million households that get over-the-air television, and particularly people who live in apartments or who may be of lower income, that we want to be sure that it gets done right.
Well, just to add on to that, what are you expecting next to come from the FCC? And they've already ruled and said that a certain type of device is okay, but their rules, as far as I read them, were very conservative. So long as there's no interference, I believe, is part of the
right.
Of
and that's the big kind of rub here is what do we define as interference? And I think that's why our argument has always been, you know what, we are all about technology. We're in the process of getting live over-the-air television on cell phones. We're putting FM chips in cell phones. We want television and radio to be on every gadget and every device possible because it's ubiquitous and people love it and we have great content. But let's be sure that whatever rules we come up with on white spaces doesn't harm the ability of people to get over-the-air television.
Well, and then another question on that. The only device that we are aware of that might even come close is a Motorola device that uses a database that will pinpoint fixed television stations and other areas. That they have been arguing from the beginning that that's the best way to go when it comes to white spaces, and then there's another group that believes that just sensing technology will do that. Does NAB have a preference between either of those two devices?
Well, we know that sensing technology doesn't work. That is the least viable technology. The database works better, but it's very complicated. I think we all need to. This is one where you have to have all of the parties in the room talking about it and having an honest dialogue, as opposed to people just kind of pinging back and forth. But I think it's still going to take a while before these emerging technologies get through. Ironically, Neil, when he was talking about this issue with you, we align with them because the theatrical community, Las Vegas, anybody that uses a wireless mic is concerned because if you have this device near a wireless mic, you can't have the wireless mic work. So what happens when you're watching a sporting event and someone's got one of these devices and there's some big play and the announcer says and it blanks out.
When Chairman Martin was head of the FCC, content was a big topic of his and the FCC's, especially when it comes to broadcasters. Do you expect the same from the Obama administration?
I'm not sure. I think we'll see how it plays out. I think one thing we've seen with President Obama is his strong support for the First Amendment and for individual freedom. And I always tell our broadcasters, we're not in the vulgar business. We do great things, and I think it's just too early to tell.
One more question as far as the future then. You talked about technologies and the way that people are watching television. You can watch it off of iTunes or Hulu or something like that. What does that mean as far as a strategy is concerned for broadcasters, particularly those who depend on the networks to provide programming and consequently advertising dollars for their stations?
Yeah, well, I think the one thing that the digital technology brings us is the ability to move television beyond just the TV in your kitchen or in your living room or your bedroom. The point that I made about we are now, there's an organization called the Open Mobile Video Coalition that is experimenting around the country, and we have rules that are being finalized to allow live mobile digital television. So when you're on the bus or you're on the train coming into DC, you put on your device, there's about 253 million of them that will eventually have live TV. And I think that will help our industry kind of reinvent itself in the digital age.
Where's the money coming from them and all these types of technology and these new formats?
We did a study at the NAB 2 years ago that indicated that if we would go with live mobile television, that we would see incremental advertising revenues grow at about $1.2 billion a year. And we anticipate that this is going to begin to occur after the DTV transition in later 2009 and 2010. So I'm very, it's amazing. People look at the broadcast business, and one thing that we need to talk about for both television and radio is all of the technological adaptation that we've done, and that we're new media. We're cross-platform. On the radio side, I would encourage everyone to go to a great website called radioheardhere.com, where we're talking about innovation in radio every day. There's been more innovation in radio in the last 12 months than there has been in the last 70 years.
Has satellite put a crimp in radio?
Not really. Our listenership, we're at about 235 million radio listeners week in and week out. We were up 3 million listeners last year. You say that to people and they go, my God, radio's up. And I like to say in the history of the world, there's been more choices for media than ever, and radio's up. That says something about the strength of radio.
We have time for one more question.
Well, we were touching on the new media and the internet and the satellite. This goes back to the issue of the performance tax, the performance royalty. If you have the cable radio, internet radio, satellite radio, all pay this particular performance royalty.
Right.
The broadcasters don't pay.
That's because
what's the difference there?
Well, they don't provide the massive promotional value. On any given day, there are few people listening to a song on satellite, or even fewer people listening to a song on cable. When you have 235 million listeners, 94% of adults, 61% of people getting new music over the radio, a $1.4 to $2.6 billion worth of promotional efforts, not including concerts, ticket sales, T-shirt sales, everything else. I think it's, somebody at the hearing said it's the equivalent of having a giant, and an ant.
Well, I guess so.
And their business models are different
than ours. To take that argument to its logical conclusion, then, if then, satellite or radio or cable all were to grow to the size that broadcast, would the performance royalty be fair for them?
I think that they would have to approach Congress and make that argument. At the end of the day, I think that there's been a symbiotic relationship between America is the wealthiest art center on the face of the planet. Artists, singers, songwriters do better here than in every other country. Our business is bigger than like the next 12 countries combined. And I think a lot of that has to do with the symbiotic relationship where people can turn on their radio, find out about new artists, go buy their songs, and everyone benefits.
Joining us once again, David Rehr, the National Association of Broadcasters and Services, their president. Also joining in the conversation today, Fawn Johnson of Dow Jones Newswires. To both, thanks for being on the Communicators.
Thanks for having me.
Tonight